in 2013, Wabash Center had their 60th anniversary of when it was set up by a group of concerned parents who wanted more for their children with disabilities than what the state and the local community would provide. So I decided to start looking into the history behind my brother. He is he's about 16 months older than me, so we're pretty close to the same age. And I remember that he was a real handful, a really cute kid. He went to programs at Noble Center, or it was called Noble School back then. I remember when Roy Rogers and Dale Evans came to Noble School, and my mom took me along with my brother and sister to see them. And there was a little gathering room with a piano, and Roy Rogers sang, and I had my little cowgirl outfit on with my suede and my hat and all of that. And that was a wonderful type of program that we had. And I remember that specifically. And I also remember bad things too. I remember when my brother was sent to Central State Hospital, and we would go visit him after church every Sunday, and I was probably 10, 11, somewhere in that age. And I remember him coming out through the door of this big brick edifice, and because we were never allowed to go inside. And he had bruises all over his arms, and he had scabs. And I remember seeing these round scabs on his arm when I was a kid, and I just knew that something evil was going on there. But I was scared and absolutely mortified, and I couldn't talk about it with my parents because it was just horrible. So I decided in 2013 that I was going to look into this. I was going to face it head on and find out what had happened to my brother. So I contacted the state archives, because that's where all the Central State files are kept, and I had to get permission from my mom to go, even though I was his guardian. And I drove down there. It's in Indianapolis, somewhere here. And I spent 5 hours. They had the files all pulled for me. It was all on microfiche. And they were ready for me. And they sat me down, and I went through about 2,000 pages in 5 hours, including a short break for lunch. So as you know, I was reading very, very quickly, skimming as much as I could. And it wasn't always easy to read because it was microfiche. And the stuff that I saw would turn my stomach. I remember those round scabs on him because one of the doctor's reports had on there that there were round marks on his hand that nobody knew where they came from. And nobody bothered to look into it. There was no resolution to it. But to me, they look like cigarette burns. And I know that a lot more people smoked back then, and I suspect that they were cigarette burns that were all over my brother's arms. And the scratches and scrapes, those were from either the caretakers or some of the other patients at Central State Hospital. And then I found this report that showed that my brother had received a concussion. He had been beaten so badly that he had to go into the clinic at Central State. And the doctor mentioned this. It's signed by the doctor. He's probably long gone. But he received a concussion, and they didn't know where it came from. And again, there was never any follow-up report or resolution on what had happened. To be beaten to the point where you have a concussion, what does that do to you later in life? And being on all kinds of medications to do nothing but sedate you, what does that do to your life and to your health? So I know that was horrible for him, but it was horrible for me as a child, knowing that evil things were happening inside Central State Hospital walls and I couldn't do anything about it. And then it was doubly horrifying as an adult to know that that kind of stuff was going on back then and nobody cared. They didn't close Central State down until 1994. One other piece of information I found going through his files was the number of times that he was tied up. They had a whole checklist. That's what it was made for. They had codes on how they were tied up and how long they were tied up, whether they were tied to their bed, by their arms, or by their legs, or by both. If they were tied to their chair, by their arms, by their legs, or by both, and how many hours they stayed there. There were many days where my brother stayed tied up much longer than he was not tied up. And that was just a regular way of doing business back there. He's a joy for all that he went through, the abuse that he took physically and mentally. He is the gentlest person you would ever want to meet, and how he has developed that grace inside of him. I don't know how he does it. I would not be able to be the kind of good person that he is after experiencing 29 years of hell. But he's thankful for everything that he has. He smiles at people, he says hello, he wants to shake your hand. He's just a very positive person.